The locked church. I remember the sound first. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clearly a sound. Just the faintest shift of air from inside the sanctuary as I pulled the front doors closed behind me. The kind of pressure change you feel in your ears when a building settles for the night. I stood there for a second on the stone steps, keys in my hand, waiting to see if I'd imagined it. The parking lot was almost empty. One street lamp flickered near the road. It was late spring, but the temperature had dropped fast after sunset. The air felt cool against the sweat on the back of my neck. The youth group had run long, pizza boxes stacked in the fellowship hall, folding chairs left slightly out of line. I'd stayed to straighten everything. That was my job when I volunteered. Last one out, lock up. I checked every room. I'm methodical about it. Always have been. I started in the classrooms, light switches off, thermostats set back, closet doors opened and closed again, just to be sure. Then the bathrooms. I physically pushed on each stall door, glanced behind them. Fellowship hall, empty. Kitchen, coffee pot unplugged, storage closet locked. The sanctuary was last. I walked the center aisle and looked under the pews out of habit. There's nowhere to hide in there anyway. It's an old church, small town, built in the 1920s. Hardwood floors that creak even when no one's walking on them. Stained glass along both sides, but at night it's just black panes. I turned off the chandelier lights from the back panel. The room dropped into a soft gray from the exit sign glow. Then I locked the main doors. Deadbolt, handle. I tested it twice. I remember thinking how quiet it felt once the door shut. Churches have a different kind of quiet when they're empty. Not silence exactly, more like the building holding its breath. I stepped off the front steps and headed toward my car. It was parked along the side lot near the hedge, gravel under my shoes. My key fob beeped when I unlocked it. The sound echoed more than it should have. That's when I looked up. The sanctuary lights were on. Not all of them, just the front half. A warm glow spilling through the tall windows near the pulpit. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I tried to tell myself I'd forgotten something. Maybe I didn't flip the right switch. Maybe there's a secondary panel I missed. But I know the layout. I've been part of that church since I was a kid. I turned slowly toward the building. Through the center window, between two dark vertical lines of stained glass, I could see the front pews and the aisle, and someone standing near the third row. Still, facing the pulpit, the shape was clear, shoulders, head, arms at their sides, not moving. I didn't feel a rush of fear. It was more like a disconnect, like I was looking at a photo and trying to decide if it was edited. The sanctuary doors were locked. I had the only key. The pastor keeps a copy at home, and he'd left hours earlier. I'd watched him drive away. I took a few steps closer, staying on the edge of the lot. Gravel crunching under my shoes sounded too loud now. The figure didn't shift. I checked my phone out of reflex. 10:43 p.m. There aren't any side entrances, no basement access, no back door except the one that opens into the fellowship hall, and I'd locked that from inside before exiting through the front. I went back up the steps. My hands were steady when I unlocked the main doors again. The deadbolt turned smoothly. No resistance. No sign it had been disturbed. I opened the door just enough to step inside. The air felt warmer than it had a few minutes earlier. That was the first thing I noticed, like the heat had kicked back on. The sanctuary lights were fully on now. Not just the front half. Every chandelier lit, the pews were empty, the aisle was clear. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. The building hummed faintly, old electrical wiring, the soft ticking of cooling metal somewhere above. I walked down the aisle slowly, scanning left and right. Nothing, no coats, no bags, no scuff marks on the floor. When I reached the third pew, I stopped where I'd seen the figure standing. The wood floor beneath me was smooth, no indentation, no sign anyone had been there. I turned in a slow circle. Everything looked exactly the way I'd left it, except for the lights. I walked to the back panel and checked the switches. They were all flipped up. I'm certain I'd turned them off. I stood there, staring at them, trying to remember the motion of my hand. I could picture it clearly. The click, the drop into dimness. I flipped them down again. The sanctuary went dark except for the exit signs. I waited. Nothing changed. I walked the entire building a second time. Every room, every closet, still empty. When I came back to the sanctuary, I stood at the back and looked towards the third pew again. The room felt smaller now. Not physically, just in the way sound carries differently when you're alone. I locked up a second time. Tested the handle twice again. When I stepped outside, I didn't go straight to my car. I stayed near the steps and watched the windows. They stayed dark. I told myself I'd missing something. Light reflection, a shadow from the street lamp. Maybe someone had been outside on the sidewalk and the glass distorted it. That explanation held for about 30 seconds. Then I realized something else. When I first saw the figure, it wasn't backlit. It wasn't a shadow. It was lit from above. I had seen the shape clearly against the pews. The overhead lights had already been on, which means they had turned on before I looked up, before I unlocked the doors again. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I came back early under the excuse of helping set up for Sunday service. I checked the locks again in daylight. No scratches, no damage, no loose hinges. I asked the pastor casually if anyone else had a key. He said no. I didn't tell him what I saw. I still volunteer there. I still lock up sometimes. But I don't walk to my car right away anymore. I stand at the edge of the lot and look back at the sanctuary windows. And every time I pay attention to the third pew, because I'm not afraid of someone breaking in. I'm afraid of seeing the lights already on. If you enjoy slow, unsettling horror stories, consider liking the video and subscribing. The confession booth. The vacuum made a low, steady hum against the carpet, but it kept dipping in volume every few seconds like something was pressing lightly against the hose. At first, I thought the bag was full. I shut it off, and the silence filled the chapel immediately. The kind of thick, padded silence you only get in large buildings after hours. The stained glass windows were black from the outside. The only light came from the wall sconces spaced evenly along the aisle, dim and yellow. I stood there beside the confession booth, one hand still on the handle of the vacuum, listening. There was a faint rustle, not from the room, from inside the booth. It sounded like fabric shifting against wood. I waited a few seconds, expecting a follow-up sound, a cough, a door latch, anything that would turn it into something ordinary. Nothing came. I leaned down and tapped the vacuum with my knuckles, like that might explain it. The motor had been running hard for the last hour. Maybe it had rattled the thin wood panels of the booth. That made sense. The confession booth was old, dark oak, polished smooth by decades of use. 2 narrow doors, one for the priest, one for the person confessing. Both latched from the inside during use. On Saturdays, I cleaned the church alone. The priest left around 6. By 7:30, the building was empty except for me. I checked the front doors myself every week. I glanced at my phone. 8:12 p.m. The church felt larger at night. The ceilings seemed higher, the air cooler. The smell of furniture polish and old hymnals lingered close to the floor. I rolled the vacuum back toward the center aisle and switched it on again. The hum returned. When I reached the edge of the confession booth, I heard it. Michael. It was quiet, almost threaded into the vacuum noise. Soft enough that if I'd been wearing earbuds, I might have missed it. But I wasn't. I shut the vacuum off again. Silence pressed in. I stared at the closed door of the booth. The whisper hadn't sounded distant. It hadn't echoed the way voices usually do in that room. It sounded contained, close to wood. I walked around to the priest's side first. The door was closed. There's a small brass handle on the outside. It doesn't lock from that side during off hours, only from inside when in use. I turned the handle gently. It didn't move. Locked. That made me pause. The priest always leaves the doors slightly ajar after Saturday confessions. I've seen it dozens of times. It helps air it out. I tried the other door. Locked too. I stood there, staring at the narrow wooden panels, trying to recall if maybe he'd changed routine recently. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. The building was completely still. No footsteps, no air vents running. Even the refrigerator in the parish hall had gone quiet. I knocked lightly on the priest's door. "Father?" My voice sounded smaller than usual. No answer. I waited long enough to feel foolish, then softer than before. "Michael." It came from the other side of the thin divider inside the booth, the side where the penitent sits, not the priest's compartment. My name again. Calm, not strained, not urgent, just spoken like someone making sure I could hear it. I stepped back. The wood of the booth looked solid. No cracks, no visible gaps except the small screened partition inside, which I couldn't see from where I stood. The doors were still locked. I crouched down slightly and pressed my ear near the seam where the penitent door met the frame. Nothing. No breathing. No shifting. I stood up slowly and walked toward the light switch panel along the wall. For a second, I considered turning all the lights off and seeing if someone inside reacted. Instead, I called out again, "Is someone in there?" The question felt strange the moment I said it. If someone had stayed behind accidentally, they would have answered already. If someone had broken in, they wouldn't whisper my name. The temperature felt cooler near the booth, not dramatically, just a small difference like standing near a drafty window. I placed my palm flat against the penitent door. The wood was cold. Not room temperature. Cold enough that I noticed. I pulled my hand back. "Michael." This time it came from the priest's side. I know that because the sound shifted. It wasn't behind the same panel. It was as if someone had leaned closer to the interior divider and spoken through the screen. The voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. Not someone I recognized exactly, just familiar. That bothered me more than anything. I stepped back another pace. I considered getting my phone out to record it, but something about that felt performative, like admitting this was happening. Instead, I walked briskly down the aisle toward the front entrance and checked the doors. Locked, deadbolt secure, no movement outside through the glass. When I came back to the confession booth, I moved slower. I crouched again and looked carefully at the bottom of the penitent door. There was a small gap between the door and the floor, less than half an inch. No light came through from inside, which meant the interior light wasn't on. If someone were sitting in there, they'd be in darkness. I reached out and tried the priest's handle again, still locked. There's no exterior key for those doors, only a small latch inside each compartment. The priest is the only one who uses it during confession. I straightened up. "I'm going to get the pastor," I said out loud, though I knew he was gone. Silence answered me. I stood there another full minute. Nothing. No whisper. No movement. Eventually, I finished vacuuming the rest of the sanctuary. I avoided the booth entirely. I left it for last. When I came back to it near 9, I decided to try one more time. I grabbed the priest's handle and turned it firmly. It opened, smoothly, no resistance. The interior compartment was empty. Chair in place, Bible on the small shelf. Kneeler untouched. I stepped inside and checked the latch. It wasn't engaged. I moved to the other side and opened the penitent door. Also unlocked. Empty. The air inside both compartments felt normal now, room temperature. I stood in the narrow priest side for a moment and looked at the small screen that separates the two seats. The mesh was dark. Still, I haven't told anyone about it. Every Saturday since then, I clean the same areas in the same order. The confession booth is always unlocked when I arrive now, but I don't vacuum near it with the lights off anymore. And I don't say my own name inside the sanctuary because I'm not completely sure the voice was calling to get my attention. It sounded more like it was checking if I was still there. The church camera footage. The first motion alert came at 2:07 a.m. It wasn't unusual by itself. The system was old, sensitive. Moths sometimes triggered it if they got inside the vestibule. Heat fluctuations could do it too. What made me pause was the location. Sanctuary, center aisle. I was sitting in the small security office just off the fellowship hall. The room smelled faintly like dust and burnt coffee. A single desk lamp lit the keyboard and the monitor wall. The rest of the church was dark. I clicked into the live feed. The sanctuary looked exactly the way I'd left it 20 minutes earlier. Long rows of pews, center aisle stretching toward the pulpit, exit signs glowing dim red at the back. No movement. I leaned closer to the screen. The timestamp in the corner blinked steadily. 2:07:34 a.m., 2:07:35. Nothing shifted. I muted the alert and waited another 30 seconds. Still empty. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and walked down the hallway toward the main doors. The building always felt larger at that hour, the air cooler, the hum of old wiring louder once you noticed it. When I pushed open the sanctuary doors, the hinges gave a low, familiar creak. My flashlight beam ran down the aisle. Empty. The temperature felt even. No drafts, no open windows. I walked the full length of the room, sweeping the light under pews, across the altar steps, along the side walls. Nothing. I stood in the exact center of the aisle where the alert had marked movement. Silence. Just the faint ticking of something contracting in the ceiling. I went back to the office and logged the alert as a false trigger. At 2:19 a.m., it happened again. Sanctuary, center aisle. This time, I didn't rush. I pulled up the playback instead of the live view. The recording rolled back 10 seconds before the alert. The room sat still, unchanged. Then, at exactly 2:18:57, the motion box appeared on screen, a faint digital outline highlighting the center aisle, but I couldn't see what it was outlining. There was no visible shape, no shadow crossing, just the box flickering as if something had passed through. I replayed it twice. Same result. I went down again, slower this time. When I stepped into the sanctuary, I didn't turn on my flashlight right away. I let my eyes adjust to the ambient glow of the exit signs. The aisle stretched out in a low red haze. I stood there for a full minute without moving. Nothing moved back. When I did sweep the light forward, it revealed the same still room. But I noticed something small. The third pew on the left, the aisle side Bible, was slightly angled. Not dramatically, just not perfectly parallel to the seat like the others. I walked over and straightened it. I told myself I might have brushed it earlier during my first check. I finished the sweep and went back to the office. At 2:43 a.m., another alert. Same location. This time, I didn't even stand up. I watched the live feed. The motion box flickered again over the center aisle. The pews were empty. But something felt off. I couldn't tell what at first. Then I saw it. In the camera feed, the third pew on the left, the Bible was angled again. Exactly the way it had been before I straightened it. I froze. I knew I'd fixed it. I remember pressing it flush with the seat edge. I pulled up the feed from 5 minutes earlier. In that footage, after I'd returned to the office, the Bible was straight. In the current live view, it was angled. I looked at the timestamp, 2:43:12 a.m. I stood up slowly and walked back to the sanctuary. This time, I kept my eyes on the pew before I even crossed the threshold. From the doorway, I could see the third pew clearly. The Bible was straight, perfectly aligned. I didn't move for several seconds. Then I stepped inside, still straight. I walked down the aisle, my shoes making soft contact with the wood floor. When I reached the pew, I placed my hand lightly on the book. It hadn't been moved. I turned around and looked toward the security camera mounted high in the back corner. Small red indicator light blinking steadily. Recording. I went back to the office without adjusting anything. I didn't want to touch it again. At 3:02 a.m., the alert came back. Sanctuary, center aisle. I didn't check live this time. I went straight to playback. The camera view showed the sanctuary, empty as before. The motion box flickered over the aisle, and then I saw it. The third pew on the left was missing. Not broken, not damaged, just not there. In the recording, the aisle stretched one pew length farther before the next row began. Everything else was the same. Same lighting, same pulpit, same exit signs. But the spacing was wrong. I stared at it long enough to feel my eyes strain. I rewound. On earlier footage, the pew was present. On the newest clip, it wasn't. I stood up immediately and walked back to the sanctuary. When I opened the doors, the room looked exactly as it always had. All pews in place, including the third one. I walked down and counted. 1, 2, 3. It was there, solid under my hand. I looked toward the camera in the corner again, then back at the aisle. I tried to picture the version I'd just seen on the screen. The gap, the extended stretch of floor, it didn't match what I was standing in. I returned to the office slowly. When I replayed the clip again, the pew was back, exactly where it belonged. No gap, no missing row. The motion box still flickered, but the room looked normal. I sat there until my shift ended at 5. No more alerts came. I didn't file a report. I didn't mention it to the church board. The system hasn't been replaced yet. Sometimes around 2 in the morning, the motion alert still triggers in the center aisle. I don't always check it now, because I realized something during those nights. The camera isn't glitching. It's recording something accurately. It's just not always recording the same room I'm standing in, and I don't know which version is the correct one.